Great, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. As Hafsa mentioned, I'm Miguel Gallardo, professor of psychology at Pepperdine University at our Irvine graduate campus down in the Orange County area, and do some work in the community as well, and have facilitated and done some of these panels talking about the S word. And so I'm really pleased to be doing that again. And this is an important topic. I think one of the messages from the S word was, I really liked it. It's about finding reasons to live was one of the sort of, I think, take homes from the S word. And so hopefully those who are able to be present tonight have seen the S word. If you haven't, I would highly encourage you to take a look at it. As Hafsa mentioned earlier on, we're in the Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and Suicide Prevention Week just passed last week. And so this is an important time for us. I'm really here just to sort of facilitate the conversation and ask the panelists some questions, and they're going to really do the brunt of the work. But before we launch in, I just want to mention that, anytime we start talking about, I think, some topical areas that can really, I think, evoke a lot of emotion and feeling in folks, we always want to, give folks a heads up. And some of the comments and some of the narratives and stories and things that we may talk about today may trigger folks, may remind folks of previous experiences or things that they've experienced themselves or family members or friends. And if that happens and you feel like you need some additional support, Brandon is going to put in the chat a list of resources for you that you can follow up with. Even if you're not, moved at this moment in some way to where you need some follow-up, take those resources, pass them along to other folks that you think might benefit from those and might be helpful to see that. And so, just wanted to put that out there, that make sure you're taking care of yourselves if you're feeling yourself being moved in some way that you may not have anticipated, and we totally understand that, and then use some of those resources. So let me introduce the panelist this evening. Our first panelist is Hafsa Ahmad, who's an MSW and a mental health advocate and a program manager at the Orange County Multi-Ethnic Collaborative of Community Agencies. And she's also a stigma smasher, as you can tell on her screen, and very proud of that, and also does a very good job of smashing stigma, if I may say so, as well. And she's also a suicide attempt survivor, which I think is very important, and always appreciate Hafsa sharing her personal story. I think it's important to do that and to break that silence. Also another S word that we have to do something about. And then next we have Raul Fernandez, who is the program director at Wellness Center South, and who had a family member who's his brother, who died by suicide in 2015. And so Raul, we appreciate you being here. You and I have done this before on another panel some time ago. And so again, deeply appreciative of you sharing your personal story about your brother and being here as well. And then finally, we have Sarah Wilkie, who's a registered associate marriage and family therapist at D.D. Hirsch. Sarah's a clinician, thanks Sarah, who works with people who have suicide loss survivors, with family members and folks who've had suicide loss survivors and survivors of suicide attempts. She also provides trainings on suicide prevention, and she volunteered for the Trevor Project as a crisis chat counselor as well. So Sarah's embedded in this work from a professional clinical perspective, and then we have a couple of folks with different types of lived experiences as well. So I think a really nice balance in this conversation. So I think it goes without saying, but suicide and suicide prevention awareness is a must. Any statistics and data you look at show that the numbers are increasing. I think the pandemic certainly, I think, made more salient and even more present some of these mental health issues and concerns and challenges that folks may be negotiating and navigating in different ways. A lot of research that has said that prior to the pandemic, if you weren't dealing with anything, you might have been starting to deal with something during the pandemic. If you were dealing with something before the pandemic, it became even more salient for you during that time in different ways for a lot of folks. So important for us to talk about this. But as we think about this particular topical area, I guess I just want to invite the panelists to really talk about any personal experiences you have with suicide, and also your experiences and just impressions around silence and the stigma that surrounds suicide as well. And I'll open that up to, whoever wants to launch in. Very organic conversation.
Okay, I'll start because I think that just makes the most sense. Also, I talk the most, so might as well get it out the way. So yes, I'm Hafsa. Big reason I'm such a strong mental health advocate is that I personally experienced suicidal thoughts and 3 attempts in my life. And so I can understand what it's like, at least, from one perspective, to feel so hopeless that you don't think things will ever change or get better. Like, there's this concept of feeling suicidal where it's not necessarily that I want to die. It's like I never wanted to die. I just wanted the pain to stop. As a very important distinction that I think not everyone really realizes is that it's not really about death. It's about pain. There have been times where I just became overwhelmed. I dealt a lot with stigma when I was first diagnosed. I would tell people about my diagnosis, and they would say things like, "Oh, are you sure you're crazy? Do you really need medication? Sounds like you're making excuses," things like that, which got me to the point where I just didn't want to talk about it anymore because of all these bad reactions. And then because I didn't want to talk about it, things just got worse to the point where it became so severe that I thought about, taking my own life. I've definitely gone through periods where for years I just had suicidal ideation every day, like to the point where, I'm a strong Muslim. I did not want to take my life. So my only solution was that every day I would just kind of get down on my knees and pray to God to kill me because I didn't want to do it on my own. Just every day suicidal ideation, thinking, how to say you're stupid, you're crazy, you're never going to get better. Just all that stigma that I faced from the outside, I put onto myself. We call it self-stigma, where I just said these things to myself that no human deserves to hear because I was so hopeless, because I had lost so much, and because I was so scared. That being said, a really big reason that I speak out about it now is because I do believe there is hope, that there are so many times in my life, like when I attempted, that I just didn't think things could ever get better, but spoiler alert, they did, and I'm here. Things are a lot better. And I'm really glad that circumstances happened that allowed me to still be here, to persevere, because it's just proof that if you continue, things will get better. I tell that, with the people I work with, that if you continue, I know it's bad. I know it's terrible right now. I know it seems like there is no hope. I know it looks like there's a wall that you can never see past. But I guarantee you, if you continue, if you work on yourself, if you try, things will get better. And I see my own life as an example of that. Life's not perfect. Things suck quite frequently. I'm not going to lie. But I do try to use my example and share my story to show that no matter how dark things get, don't give up. Don't take your life. People will miss you. You'll miss opportunities that you never could have dreamed of, because you can be successful. Things will get better. You just have to persevere.
Yeah, thank you, Hafsa. Thank you, Hafsa. Others, Raul, would you like to maybe chime in as well here?
Thank you, Dr. Gallardo. Yes, Hafsa, I really related to what you were saying there, and especially the point that you made about not wanting to feel pain. And so I've been there myself, where thoughts came into my mind where I didn't want to keep on living, and I wanted the pain to go away after some low points in my life, getting bad grades in school or having breakups, bad breakups, where I lost hope from time to time. And, I know that there's something about the genetics in my family. Mental illness runs in our family. And as Dr. Gallardo had mentioned before, I lost my brother to suicide in 2015. And that was something that, hit my family hard. And, even though it's been 6 years now, we're still healing, and new situations occur where I have to use my coping skills to help me get through some difficult times. My brother was a father. He fathered 2 children biologically, and he had 2 stepchildren. Really proud of his family. And I recently did a talk at the Wellness Center about my brother, and something came up when I was doing a suicide prevention awareness discussion with our members, and I had mentioned that I'm currently expecting my first child, and my brother would be someone that I would talk to about what I'm feeling, the stress and anxiety that's coming with being a new father, because he had been there. And I remember when he presented his children to the family, he was so proud of the lives that he brought into our family. And so my brother was a person that really brought people together. I'll always have great fond memories of my brother always looking out for the family, protecting us. And I'm a very spiritual person, and I still feel my brother's spirit with me. His spirit lives through his children, in our family. I keep a photograph of my brother in my house. And so this is my brother, George.
Yeah.
He was my older brother. And maybe from the photo, you couldn't tell it because everybody always thought he was younger than me. He had a baby face. But, for me, I always try to use my family's experience with losing our brother to share that it's okay to ask for help. Growing up in a Latino family, we always didn't discuss our pain for whatever reason. We just thought it might have shown weakness. And I like to tell people that it's okay to ask for help. And I've recently needed to ask for help myself, because I've gone through a lot during the pandemic. As Dr. Gallardo had mentioned, we've all been through a lot during the pandemic. I had been laid off from a job during the pandemic, and my wife was laid off during the pandemic. And so we hit some tough times financially with that. And so thankfully we kept hope alive and kept pursuing our dreams. And now I'm a program director again at the Wellness Center South. So it was a rough journey to get back to where I'm at, but hope is still alive, and I still have hope, and anyone can accomplish their dreams. Don't ever give up on hope. And the county, Orange County, has so many great resources for us. Thank you, Brandon, for posting those on the chat, and thank you everyone for, being open to these discussions. They're much needed, and they're very important to have. Thank you.
Thank you, Raul. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Sarah, I have a question for you. I mean, as you hear about, Hafsa's and Raul's experiences with a lot of the folks that you work with, is what we're hearing, I think, some of the general sentiments that you hear from some of the folks you work with? I mean, what are some of the things you see that come up in the survivors of the folks who died by suicide and suicide attempt survivors and things like that? I mean, I'm just curious, kind of, you could maybe give us a little bit of your experience in working with some of those individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. And firstly, I just want to thank you both so much for sharing about your personal experiences. It takes a lot of courage to be, sharing about your personal story, attempt survivor, loss survivor, and, experiencing suicide ideation yourselves here in a public platform. And yeah, absolutely, it does. The experiences you've shared absolutely reflect, the survivors that I see at DD Hirsch. So just to explain again, I see survivors of suicide loss, and also suicide attempt survivors. And so, we tend to see a lot of barriers for treatment for people on both ends, on the prevention side and the postvention side. So for our folks in our survivors of suicide attempts group, we tend to hear people having these barriers of, firstly, how do I even ask for help? How do I tell someone that I'm thinking about suicide? It could be such a difficult conversation to open up. How is whoever I'm asking for support from, how are they going to respond? Are they going to see me differently now? Are they going to judge me? Are they going to bring a lot of the stigma that we talked about to that conversation? Could they call, emergency services? Just because someone's thinking about suicide doesn't necessarily mean that they're at risk in that moment in their life. And a lot of people don't understand that, who say you talked about, that important distinction about suicide is less about the desire to die. It's more about that desire to end pain, and not knowing how, way out of that pain. So, there's a lot of misunderstanding that contributes to the stigma that comes into all these different conversations when it comes to the barriers to treatment. Let's see, and those barriers even come into the conversation with clinicians, right? So a lot of clinicians maybe aren't properly trained in suicide assessment. So they might be overreactive, and utilize emergency services when they're not needed, right? So as an agency, DD Hirsch, we really push for people to be thoroughly trained in suicide assessments to really know, how do I provide support beyond just calling 911? How do I actually engage this person in safety planning, right, to help themselves to stay safe? So that's speaking to some of the experience on the prevention side. And I want to talk a little bit about the postvention side, for suicide loss survivors. The experience of loss survivors, people have lost a loved one to suicide, can be a very isolating experience. It's very different type of bereavement than loss to other causes of death. There can come with it stigma, right? How will my family be perceived that this has happened to us? Will they see one of us or all of us as responsible for this loss, or that we could have prevented it? A lot of survivors of suicide loss feel guilt themselves, like this feeling is there something I could have done to stop this? Also, we find that our folks in the bereavement, they try and find support in general grief groups, but sometimes it just feels different. They feel like a difficulty relating, to people who are experiencing general grief, because it just feels like suicide loss is just different, right? So, there's a lot of barriers to seeking support and the right type of support on both the prevention side and the postvention side. So I hope that answers the question. And, I'm here to speak about my professional experience, not my personal experience. So I'm just reflecting, my professional experience here today.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah. That's great. That's really helpful. I want to also go back to Hafsa and Raul. Raul, you mentioned hope. And, I think when we think about the S word, I mentioned, it's about finding reasons to live, and hope was embedded in, I think, the themes and the overall underlying messaging of the S word and its intent and purpose. And so I guess just for Hafsa and Raul, maybe you can talk a little bit too about what sort of helped you continue to move forward in the midst of feeling, and the way that you've described yourself feeling at different times. And Raul, even just describing the most recent situation with you and your family, your wife, and just the stress that comes with that, and the challenges. But yet, there's you mentioned hope, and so I'm wondering if both of you could talk about how does one, what tools or what did you use to keep moving forward and to be able to sort of get here and today and talk about it, and to reflect on it and talk about your journey thus far.
Yeah, I can go first. Sorry, I said that, but I was muted, so you didn't hear. But you want to go first, or you want me to go? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think there was quite a bit that helped me through. And religion can stigmatize mental illness / suicide, but religion can also be a protective factor as well. So I talked about how I wanted to die, but I didn't want to do it myself because I didn't, I didn't want to go to hell, basically, type of thing. So I would turn to prayer, and in a dark sense, I was praying for something dark, but I was still like connecting with this higher power and like going to this entity and putting my faith and belief that whatever this entity chooses for me would be correct. And I found that to be, something that kept me going. Definitely my religious / spiritual beliefs were very, very prominent in me still being here. I also had quite a bit of support from my friends and family. My family has done so much for me. They've just like taken care of me when I've just been so sick, when I've just been so depressed and terrible. They've just gone above and beyond and took me in and took care of me until I was ready to leave the house. And then they got mad that I wanted to move out. But, Pakistani people are kind of like that. And definitely my friends were there too. The friends that really stuck with me were the ones that educated themselves and allowed me to educate them by telling them, this is how my illness works. This thought comes in my mind and I can't really stop it. So these are the things I need from you if this happens, type of a thing. The Suicide Hotline was very important. I actually called Dee Dee Hirsch Suicide Hotline in 2016 before my first hospitalization, a psychiatric hospitalization. This guy named Andrew told me to just he just talked to me and said, you have your appointment with your therapist tomorrow. Why don't you just hold on, see your therapist tomorrow, and then, figure out what to do. He was such a nice guy. Like, I wish I could, reach out to him and be like, you saved me, type of a thing. But yeah, that was definitely very, very helpful. Because I think there's like a lot of hesitancy to go to hotlines because it's like, oh, I don't want to talk to a stranger. But like, there's a lot of advantages in talking to a stranger, because it's a stranger that's not going to freak out when you say, I want to kill myself. Like, if you say that to the general population, they will freak out. But if you call a hotline, it's like a trained professional who will empathize with you, listen, analyze the situation, figure out how severe, and kind of help talk you down and get you to the right resources, which is something that you don't get from like Uncle Joe, if you know what I mean. Like you get it from the Suicide Hotline. So I'm a big proponent of Suicide Hotline. I know it's weird to talk to a stranger, but it is sometimes the best thing you can do. And I think also, like, one thing that's kind of kept me going is that I've lost quite a few people to suicide myself. And whenever, Sarah, you were talking about how like a loss from suicide feels different than everyday grief. Like, I remember writing in my journal, like, when someone dies by natural causes, like, I feel like they take a part of me with them. So I feel this emptiness within me. But when someone dies by suicide, I feel like they leave a part of themselves with me, because I can't stop thinking about them. I can't stop thinking, what could I have done differently? I can't stop thinking of, could I have seen the signs? Is there anything I could have done? So that type of grief hits differently. And I didn't want to do that to someone else. I didn't want to take my life to the point where my friends and family would have to deal with that type of pain. Like, I couldn't do that to someone. And so I think that, along with being a stigma smasher and feeling passionate about my work and knowing that if I killed myself, I would just be shooting my cause in the foot, because I advocate so strongly about hope and recovery being not a possibility, but, a probability, is something that is there with enough support. So for me to take my own life is to say that everything I've said in my life is a lie, and I just can't do that.
Yeah, thank you, Hafsa. That was so powerful too. Just the analogy of like when someone dies of natural causes, they versus when someone dies by suicide. I feel like that was really, really powerful. And just thinking about that and the the legacy that can leave on somebody at the end of the day. So yeah. Raul, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe just sort of how you and your family have continued to move forward and what's been helpful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So when my brother passed away, we leaned on our church, and we attended Catholic church, and the priest at that church, his name was Father Howard Lincoln. He was instrumental in our recovery from the incident. We were surprised that he embraced us and held a ceremony and gave a beautiful service for my brother in honoring his life. We were amazed to see how many people attended my brother's funeral. It was the most attendance that I've ever seen at a funeral. Just the outpouring of support from the community, our friends, our family. And that's really what gave me the ability to talk about it and make myself vulnerable to share my experience to help others. Mm-hmm. Knowing that we were supported by the community, to be able to, keep my hope going. I worked with the therapist, and we did some powerful exercises. One of them was I got to write a letter to my brother that was very meaningful to me. Mm-hmm. It helped me with the guilt that I had felt, some of that guilt that Hafsa was just describing. I got to write a meaningful letter to my brother, and that was really helpful in my journey. In support groups, I get to hear from suicide survivors in the mental health community, and they've shared their experiences with me, and some of them have come to me and told me, when they had felt suicidal, they weren't thinking about their little brother or any of their family members, and that's helped me, with getting through some difficult times. When I had returned to work, I had taken a leave of absence from my work in 2015, and I didn't know if I was going to ever be able to return to work. But when I did, I heard from some of my colleagues, and 3 of them had come up to me and told me that they had lost family members the same way that I had. And it let me know how many families had been hit, just like my family. And that it's something that we didn't have to be ashamed about. It's something that we can help others that have suicidal ideation get the help that they deserve and need.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Appreciate that so much. Thank you, both of you. But as we think about trying to address this issue, trying to really break the silence, destigmatize in many ways. How do you think we should be addressing, suicide and this particular topic more generally speaking in our school systems, in our communities, to prevent suicide or address it, more effective ways in the aftermath of any kind of particular incident that may occur in our community?
If I could jump in here for a moment.
Yeah.
Hi. So fortunately, there's been the bill AB 2244 that was passed in 2016 by Governor Jerry Brown, which is basically a bill to say, that all school districts should have some kind of a suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention policy in place, that they need to essentially collaborate with whatever kind of community resources are out there, the experts in suicidology, the local experts. And so fortunately that was put into place. Prior to that, there was a recommendation for that, but there was never a policy. And so fortunately, that's been in effect. And, as an organization, DD Hirschio, we have had to respond pretty quickly when that was enacted. to provide a lot of different suicide intervention trainings. You have to collaborate with different schools and the Orange County area. So fortunately, that's in place. However, I think there's always improvement to be made. There is a guidebook actually on American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP.org. They actually have a guide that is for schools, to go by as far as implementation for suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. So for anyone who might be in the audience who's looking for that, we're looking for how can I support as a parent, or I just want to check up on my school and see how they're doing. You can reference that website. Also on suicidology.org, they also have some resources there. But absolutely, I think it needs to be addressed in the schools. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds. And especially, we have particular groups who are at higher risk. Actually the bill AB 2246 in particular says that there needs to be implementation specifically for high-risk groups, including LGBTQ youth. So I could go on in terms of like the details in terms of what the policy should be, but I think instead I'll just say refer to that. It needs to be talked about though, and it needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed in an informed way. So we don't want schools just blindly saying, I think this is what we should do. It needs to be informed because suicide is a sensitive topic, and there are safe ways to talk about suicide and suicide loss, and there are unsafe ways to talk about suicide. Mm-hmm. And so, to prevent any sort of suicide contagion, because as we know, being a survivor of suicide loss, can be statistically a risk factor. It can be a protective factor, like we've talked about as well, but it can be a risk factor for further suicides. It's very important that we work on prevention in schools, know how to do proper intervention, and also really make sure we're addressing postvention in an informed manner. So that's my take.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And it's interesting because as you were talking, and I was thinking about, parents and school systems and wondering how they're responding to this. And then I saw David Dooley. Thank you, David, for posting your question around, sort of parenting practices, if you will, or parenting education. And I always find it interesting. It's like, there's this sort of train of thought that like if we talk about sex education in school, kids are going to have it. Well, it's like, well, I mean, kids are having sex regardless if we talk about it or not. And so it's like suicide, or like substance use. It's like whether we talk about it or not, it's going to happen. And so we should talk about it. And so I'm wondering, Sarah, and then even just think about David's question around, like it sounds like families can really be a huge source of support. I think Hafsa and Raul really sort of resonated that that resonated in their stories to me. But also, it sounds like parents can also be somewhat of maybe a not so helpful at times, maybe unsupportive at times. And so I guess I'm wondering, Sarah and others as well, like what role do we need to families need to play, parents need to play, and should we be doing something differently about how we educate and how we talk about this with our families and schools and whatnot? And by the way, Sarah, one thing, Sarah, if you could just repeat that AF, just so Brandon can put that in the chat for folks. The
AFSP.org.
Okay, cool. AFSP.org. Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, Brandon. Okay, Hafsa, sorry.
Yeah, so I work at MECA, the Multi-Ethnic Collaborative of Community Agencies, and last year what we did was we made culturally responsive suicide prevention trainings that were informed by the communities. So it wasn't like I made the training and then they translated it into 8 languages. It was like, no, every agency hosted focus groups and interviews to inform these trainings. The trainings had different pictures, different names, slightly different content to make it applicable to every culture. And a very big part of this is that we had a training for adults and we had a training for youth. And in the training for youth, we taught the kids, how do you talk to your parents if you're experiencing suicidal thoughts? And in the training for adults, we talked to them about how do you talk to your kids if one of them approaches you and talks about feeling suicidal. So I agree, David, in the chat that like it is absolutely crucial to educate the parents, because right now, as it stands, especially for young people, they're 2/3 of youth will go to another youth before they go to a parent if they're experiencing suicidal thoughts. It's just that peer-to-peer connection is strong. The stigma is very strong, especially if you're from certain backgrounds, that it makes it really difficult for a young person to really reach out to the parent, and a lot of times the parents just don't understand. So I definitely agree with you on that respect for sure. I think it's really important that we do have education in the schools, not just for the kids, not just for the teachers, but also for the adults, the parents. That's why we promoted these trainings so strongly, is because there's so many misconceptions about suicide. This concept of, oh, if we talk about it, our kids are going to do it. And it's like, no, it's just, that's not how it works. That's just unfounded. There is no evidence for that. That's not how it works. Actually, talking about suicide is one of the strongest ways to prevent suicide. And I would also say, like, it's very important, like, if we're talking about suicide in the schools or in the communities, we have to be culturally responsive. So, for example, in the Cambodian community, let me backtrack. Standard suicide prevention trainings will tell people, oh, ask directly, are you thinking of suicide? The first thing. That's kind of like, the norm, the best practice. But actually, what we found is that when you're speaking with certain multi-ethnic communities, jumping to the question actually can backfire. For example, in the Cambodian community, if you were to ask an elderly Cambodian person, are you thinking of suicide? That's perceived as an insult. That would be something that would insult the person and make them feel very ashamed. So you can't do the standard practice. You can't just go up to this person and ask that question directly. You have to go about it a different way. You have to build rapport. You have to work up to the question. You have to ask it differently. And yes, you do ultimately ask the question, but it shouldn't be the first thing asked. And I've also, they're training like teachers to talk to kids. Like someone's telling me about how like they were in a middle school and the teachers were taught like, oh, if a kid is experiencing suicidal thoughts, the first thing you ask them is, are you thinking of suicide? Well, is that correct though? Do kids really understand what suicide is? Like, is that something that is immediately obvious? Is that really the right thing to do? So I think we kind of have to like put more context behind things and be a little more intentional versus just ascribing to, what should be done based upon, trainings for a certain demographic.
Yeah, no, thank you, Hafsa. Thank you, Hafsa. It reminds me of I always say this, give this analogy, but like, trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. It's like the only way that you can do that is if you shave off and cut off parts of the square peg and, parts of the identity, parts of the lived experience, part of the culture, whatever it may be. And so this idea of universality that, one size fits all, I think we have to certainly revisit that as we continue to have our discussions and dialogues and try to really make this more embedded in our everyday narratives and conversations. So yeah, I appreciate that, Hafsa. Anybody else want to respond to that? Or I see Raul moving around over there and Sarah. So Raul, yeah.
Yeah, so when we were talking about parents and family, I really appreciate that question from our audience, from David. Thanks. I always think of NAMI's family to family support group. That's a reliable group to help steer family members to help support their loved ones that are experiencing mental health challenges. I've been seeing a trend, it might be the pandemic, where families are spending more time with their loved ones, but I see more family members coming into the wellness center to encourage their son or daughter to sign up and get some support. So I'm liking, seeing that happen, but I do know that there's other experiences out there where people aren't supported by their family. And yes, Dr. Gallardo, my family is very supportive with me in my recovery journey. I haven't mentioned this in this panel yet, but I have my own recovery journey. I'm a former addict, and so I have substance abuse in my past. I'm an alcoholic, and so I'm 16 years sober, and my family's incredibly supportive to help me remain on track with my sobriety.
Yeah. Good to see that is. Congratulations on the
Thank you.
16 years. That's a
Gracias.
big deal. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. I was talking to one of my students actually at the university, and he was celebrating his birthday, but he goes, it's my birthday, but what I'm really looking forward to celebrating is my 10 years of sobriety, and that was much more meaningful and impactful for him. So I think it's a really big deal. So thank you for sharing that, Earl. Appreciate it. Sarah, do you want to jump in here? I know I saw you moving your hand earlier as well, but anything you want to add to this?
I was thinking about a response. Yeah. So the topic is family support, and I'm trying to kind of speak to both the attempt survivor experience, the experience of someone who has thoughts of suicide, and also the loss survivor. So I'm kind of struggling to know which to speak to. I guess I'll talk about attempt survivors and people who struggle with ideation. Actually, I just was facilitating a survivors of suicide attempt group today, teaching my group safety plans, and we got to step 4, which is who can you call for support? Who can you call for support if you're thinking about suicide? And we just got a lot of silence, and that was a discussion piece, because a lot of people just feel like, well, I don't feel like I can name a single person that I can call for support, or maybe I can, but I don't know how they're going to respond. And that's part of why we have the groups that we do, so that we have the opportunity for them to exchange contacts, obviously if it's within their comfort with their boundaries, to be able to call each other if they need support. But it can be very difficult, to reach out, even family members, even if they are supportive, even if they are meaning well. It's a very difficult, conversation to have. And even if the family members are well-meaning, they still might not know how to provide, positive support. And so sometimes that's a conversation piece that we can have with them. How do we teach people how to be a good support system? How do we teach, our family members, what we need when we're in a state of crisis, or when we're starting to get to that place? So family member support, I think a lot of the times people are well-meaning, but we need education, right? We need education. We need to be able to start that conversation in the first place. And then as far as the loss survivors, so when there's been a loss to suicide, I think a lot of the times it becomes very difficult for families to know how to communicate regarding the loss. So, at D.D. Hirsch, we also provide family therapy services. But a lot of the time before we start seeing the family, we got to see the individuals first, because, they got to experience their own grief, their own emotions, which tend to be, big. And maybe we even have emotional reactions towards our other family members. Maybe there's a feeling of anger, like, I wish that my loved one and my family would have done more to support, our loved one who died by suicide, or maybe there's a fear that I want to share this about, my grief process. Like, I want to talk about my loved one, but I don't want to trigger my other family members. I don't want to induce sadness in them, or maybe it's a feeling of, hey, I really want to, go to my loved one's favorite place on their birthday, every year when the anniversary comes up or whatnot. But I don't know how to say that to my loved one. So, there's a lot of difficulties around the communication, even for suicide loss survivors. And that's part of kind of what we address in our treatment at D.D. Hirsch. We recognize that suicide just doesn't impact, people on an individual basis, but the family system as a whole as well.
Yeah, Sarah, I want to ask you a follow. Oh, Hafsa, go ahead. I see you. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to really emphasize a point, is that there's a lot of emphasis on the person experiencing suicidal thoughts, like, oh, don't be ashamed, reach out, call this number, reach out to your friends, blah, blah, blah. But I think that is misplaced, because a big reason people don't reach out is because they get bad reactions. Like, if anything, it should be a two-pronged approach, where we're educating the average person on how to respond if someone approaches you with, like, thoughts of suicide. Because people don't know how to handle it. People freak out and call 911, or they say the wrong thing, or they just hand someone a hotline number in a cold way. And so I really want to emphasize, for all of us out there, is that we can't place the burden on the person experiencing suicidal thoughts, that it's like a large scale macro effort where we have to educate everyone on how to do it. It's kind of like, we train people on first aid CPR, like as many people as possible, because it's likely at some point they're going to have to intervene. It's not like we train people having heart attacks, like, oh, this is how you reach out to someone when you're having a heart attack so they can do CPR. No, that doesn't make sense. So likewise, we need to have these efforts where we reach the average person and educate them. And that was a big part of what MECA did with those suicide prevention trainings that they're doing this month and they did last year, is that we're just training the everyday person so they know how to respond if they're put in that situation.
Yeah, thank you, Hafsa. Thank you. So I just want to encourage folks who are participating, if you have any questions, make sure you submit those. Happy to save some time with you. And I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to keep going. And Sarah, I want to ask you a question, and I want to ask the panel one final question. But I guess, Sarah, as you think about your work and some of the work you've done, both as a clinician, as a trainer, and as a volunteer, like, what do we know works? What do we know works and helps these individuals and their families that you might recommend folks think about or be mindful of as we have these discussions? Like, what can we give folks to take away that we know might be helpful for them?
Yeah. Well, that's a big question.
Yeah, and I realize it'll look differently for different folks, but just I think thematically in general.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, what Hafsa was saying was really important, just about knowing, that as far as being a support to a person who's in crisis, I think a lot of people have this big concern about, I'm afraid I could say the wrong thing. If I ask about suicide, will that cause this person to be thinking about this? But I think the biggest takeaway that, we can give to people who want to be a support to people who might be at risk would be, to just listen. Right, to be there, to bring your human presence to that interaction, and to really allow them space to be able to talk about what is contributing to that thought of suicide for them. Listening to their reasons for wanting to die, as painful, as difficult as that is, to sit as a caregiver in that space with that person and sit with those feelings. That is what the person is looking for. When they're looking for support. That is what a person is looking for when they're calling the lifeline. They're not looking for someone to call 911 right away. They're not looking for somebody to give them answers and to say, oh, this is what to do, or, oh, it's all going to get better. Or, they're looking for someone to provide the space to talk about what's going on for them. And, eventually, yeah, they might be willing to look at kind of, resources and things like that. But, it's that providing support and listening and that human component that is going to de-escalate someone and help them to be on board with you. So I'm speaking on a peer level, right? So as a clinician, the intervention is going to look very different. But for a peer, it's listening, providing supportive statements such as, I'm so glad you could share this with me. I can't imagine how much pain you must be and to be thinking about ending your life, really validating their pain, just providing that space. And then eventually, in a warm, inviting way, inviting them to tell someone else, right? Recognizing maybe you're not the person to do that suicide intervention, but maybe you can be the person to say, hey, I want to make sure you get the right type of support. I'm so glad you were able to open up to me and that we could talk for this amount of time. I wonder, would you be willing to maybe call the lifeline together? Or if this is a child, or if this is someone, who has a very good support system, right? I wonder if, maybe together we could call your parent or caregiver, or, whoever it might be, right? How can we help you to get support and not leave that person alone, right? At DD Hirsch, we have various trainings that we give, but, our general training to general audiences, so non-clinician, is, the 3 steps are ask, listen, link. So ask about suicide, and we want to know whether they're at risk. And then listen, so providing that safe space, and then linking them to the resources as appropriate. So that's, I think, one of the biggest things I would like the audience to know, just on the prevention end, that it's there's not a magic answer. It's just, providing that space. And if you can just remember ask, listen, link, then that's going to be really, really valuable.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. So my final question, I'm not seeing any questions come up from the audience. So my final question to all of you is, I'm going to sort of ask you to take just 2 minutes each if you can, but what do you think we need to be addressing more that we're not? And then also, if we were doing this well and really kind of doing justice to suicide prevention and awareness, what would that look like ideally? So I know those are big questions, but so what are we not addressing that we need to? And if we were doing this well, what would it look like? How would it look differently?
I can start. I have this vision that, the American Red Cross or whoever offers CPR first aid trainings. Like, if you want to get trained in that, you just go online. There's tons of trainings all over the country, online or in person or hybrid, where you can just go and get trained on first aid CPR. I want that for suicide prevention. I want suicide prevention trainings to be so accessible and so prominent and so popular that anyone at any point can be like, you know what, I think I should learn about this, and can easily access that training and learn what to do if someone is experiencing suicidal thoughts. I want there to be multilingual versions. I want there to be versions that are culturally responsive. I want this to be a public health effort, because right now, like, I don't think people really register like, hey, I should go get trained in how to help someone if they're feeling suicidal. Like, I think everyone can say, yeah, maybe I should learn CPR, or maybe I should learn how to like bandage someone if they get hurt, but it's not immediately obvious or on people's minds that that's how it should be for suicide prevention as well. Yeah. So that's what I want to see. I want to see a large scale public health effort to educate people on what to do if someone is suicidal, because that's what we need. It goes back to my thing where I'm talking about the burden shouldn't be on the person. We shouldn't be pressuring the person, tell someone, it'll be okay. Reach out, because it's not that person's fault. The bad reactions are from other people who don't know what to do when someone is suicidal. Right. So we have to take a multi-pronged approach. Yes, we do encourage people to call a hotline, but we do educate people on what to do if someone comes up to you and says, hey, I'm thinking about suicide. And until we do that, I don't think we're really going to have a good answer to this.
Thank you, Hafsa. Thank you. Raul, you want to go next?
Yeah, I loved what you were saying there, Hafsa. And Orange County is working on that hub for us at the Be Well Center. It's that go-to place where our mental health questions can get answered. And there's wonderful groups taking place through Be Well. I just participated in the Community Suicide Prevention Initiative, CSPI, and they have their events listed on Be Well's website. So really great resource for the community, and that could be something that we really focus some energy on, submitting our events in the community at Be Well so that we can spread the word.
Great. Thank you. Sarah, you want to?
Yeah, I think I would feel really good if, anytime that there was ever an issue, like if someone was worried about someone who might be at risk, or if there was unfortunately a loss in the community, then every single person has household knowledge that, okay, these are the resources that are available to me. Because I hear way too many times at DD Hirsch, wow, I wish I had found this service years ago, and I don't even know how it's taken me years to find out about this. Or, wow, I never knew that you could call the Lifeline if you're worried about someone else who might be at risk and you're looking for guidance. I would love it for it to be household knowledge that these resources are there and that they're accessible. And I want to say, the goal is 0 suicides in Orange County, and I'm being ambitious, but I think that's all of our goal here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. We also just want to mention Be Well is one of the sponsors for this. Mecca is one of the sponsors for this. The County of Orange is one of the sponsors of this. So I really want to really support those organizations for providing the space and the resources to be able to do this as well. And I see a comment from Janice who says, as much, yeah, that's right. Thank you, Janice. Yeah. So any last comments as we wrap up? I know we have a couple minutes left as we go. Any last sort of take homes as we wrap up this evening? Hafsa?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone who's here or who's lurking, as we like to say. watching but not saying anything, and anyone in the Facebook Live and watching this VOD afterwards. I just want to say thank you very much. It's like personally very meaningful to me when I see that people actually care enough about this cause to show up. And I would just urge you to, whatever you felt or learned tonight, don't keep it to yourself. Keep the conversation going. Talk to people about what you heard, what spoke to you, what mattered to you, what you disagreed with, what you want to know more. I really, really, really want you to know that, like, it can't end here. I can only do so much. I need other people to speak up and do a lot as well. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and please don't let this conversation end.
Yeah, thank you, Hafsa. And it reminds me, we were talking a lot about creating safe spaces, and we more recently started talking about creating brave spaces, and really spaces where people can come and really tell their stories and really talk about what really matters to them, and the things that are most important for other people to hear. Safe spaces can, I think, still sort of cover some of the real issues. And so I really want to express my appreciation to all three of you, Hafsa and Raul, for really talking about your personal experiences. Those are never easy things to do, I think, but so powerful and so meaningful. And I think really capture this idea of a brave space so that we can really lift those other voices who feel silenced and who are afraid to say something. And I think you being here and you providing that voice and those experiences, I think really have a cascading effect that sometimes we may not see today or tomorrow, but at some point it's gonna affect someone in a positive way. So grateful to all three of you. Sarah, appreciate your work, continuing to support these individuals and their families, and I always find it a great honor to be a part of these conversations. Always learn something and take something away. So hopefully those who were listening today also took a lot away. That, and I want to echo what Hafsa said: pass it along, share it, pay it forward, give it to someone else to benefit from. So thank you so much again, and let's keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to Be Well, Mecca, and the county for making this possible.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
All right. You all are free to sign off. And
all right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks all.